Hello and welcome to a special preview Palooza episode of The Answer. I'm Chris Ryan. I'm joined by Seerat Sohi. Usually on The Answer, we're trying to answer questions, but this time we're going to be asking some. So we've got 10 pressing questions heading into the new NBA season. Seerat and I are going to be firing some queries at one another and seeing if we can come up with some answers. I think we have to do the most pressing, the most topical, now at this point, probably the most tiresome stories in our first two questions here. So spin the wheel of fortune and tell me, do you want to talk about Ben or Kyrie first?
Let's just go with Ben first.
So the question would be, is Ben Simmons really back, is the question.
Yes. Is he going to play any games, or is he just here to be able to actually collect a check? We don't exactly know, but this is kind of the first time that the Sixers have had a W in a while in this whole thing. If we want to be looking at it in those terms.
I think that not trading him for DeJounte Murray is a W too. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's the trades you don't make that are the most valuable.
Yeah, or D'Angelo Russell.
Right.
I would say this has probably increased their chances of being able to get Dame or Brad Beal or one of the really franchise shifting superstars that they would like to get out of a Ben Simmons trade. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that this is more about recuperating value than it is about him coming back to the team. I still don't think he'll play for the Sixers again. I frankly felt like the Sixers not only sounded pretty posy chemistry-wise in the preseason, but also started to make noises about life without Ben being a little bit more fun on the court in terms of the ball moving, the ball finding energy, basically relying on that threes and layups, Morey ball philosophy. Doc seems to be allowing that to take place. And I kind of feel like this is more about, hey, just so everybody can see, this dude is now upright, walking around and able to practice. And if you would like to trade for him, we know that he is in the tri-state area.
But if he doesn't play in any games, does it really do anything to add to its value if we don't see like, oh, okay, maybe there's a willingness to shoot a jumper or two, or just, seeing, like you said, like he is like a healthy, able basketball player?
I don't know. It's so I think that there's probably a dual track plan in place here on the part of Morey and Elton Brand and Doc Rivers and the franchise, where they're like, if it turns out that there's no deal and we want Ben and Ben wants to be here, like we have that in place and he's starting to like first practice on his own, then he'll start practicing with the team, maybe get a preseason game, maybe start to play. And then there is this guy is now in the building and no longer getting fined, but will not play for the Sixers for risk of injury. And he will be traded by December 15th, when guys who had recently or guys who've just signed for new teams can now be traded again.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. It's interesting that he just showed up, like he just showed up to the practice facility on Monday, couldn't get in. Elton Brand had to be told that Ben Simmons had actually, he was, they were expecting him, but he's actually just at the practice facility.
Yeah, his key card didn't work or whatever. Yeah, I'm sure.
Could you imagine if his key card actually didn't work? That would be like the biggest message from the organization, like, hey, we don't need you.
That would have real Succession vibes if Ben Simmons just simply could not get into the building. Ben Simmons is back with the Sixers. As we are recording this, Kyrie Irving is not with the Nets and will not be with the Nets until his vaccination status changes. The Nets said that they came to the conclusion that they did not want Kyrie Irving to be a part-time player. That they needed him to be a full-time part of the team or a no-time part of the team. So we don't have to get too mired in this one, but I do want to ask you whether or not you have a feeling whether or not this is going to be a couple of weeks long thing or a season long thing with Kyrie Irving.
Yo, this is so hard to tell because, the Simmons thing, it was kind of just a situation of money wins, right? Mm-hmm. With Kyrie, it's very obvious that he has other causes in his life that he cares about. Sometimes that is really great, and other times like he's a little bit misguided. We don't obviously getting into the differences between those two things we don't necessarily have to do, but he is definitely somebody who like sticks to what he believes. He has an identity of himself as a smart person, which can be very difficult sometimes when you end up being wrong. You can kind of dig your heels in a little bit more than your average person would. And he's also kind of made it clear, or it seems clear at least, that he is not as motivated by money as your average human being would be. He has also already made a ton of it. So I don't know. It's like, does Kyrie want to be a visionary or does he want to be a basketball player? He obviously loves the game, and I can imagine there being a point in the season where he misses it enough that it just, he just changes his mind. I don't know, Chris. This is kind of like the biggest unknown in the NBA right now. What do you think?
Yeah, I guess I would answer your question with another question, which is, does this actually materially affect whether or not the Nets can win a championship? Because that's like kind of now at this point, the thing I really want to talk about is whether or not Kyrie Irving is essential or additive to this team. He missed a lot of the playoffs. He missed, I think, or some of the playoffs last season. Durant obviously showed what he was capable of with a one-legged James Harden and a kind of island of misfit toys, although no disrespect to Joe Harris and Blake Griffin, but like that was the Kevin Durant show, and he showed that he could almost beat the team that would go on to win the title. So I still feel like the Nets are not only they're not just contenders, they're favorites even without Kyrie. I think the one thing worth noting is that Kyrie, while he is still part of the team, like a lot of money tied up in him, and it kind of reduces their flexibility in some ways to get better if that's something that they wanted to do. If there was a way to get opportunistic out there, I don't know. I mean, Ted Cruz tweets aside, I don't know what kind of trade market there is for Kyrie Irving right now. But yeah, like I think it'll be a pretty distracting cloud to hang over the team unless they can get some sort of clarity on, like, if he just says, hey, okay, cool, I'm not going to play this season, then maybe that's even better for the team so that they can move forward.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Ted Cruz, I feel like one owner who would love to have Kyrie Irving on his team is probably Tillman Fertitta.
Right.
But looking at the Nets from last season, they're not all that different than the team that lost in 7 to the Bucks. Like, obviously, like you said, Harden was on one leg. I imagine he'll be a little bit healthier. They added Patty Mills. They replaced Jeff Green with Paul Millsap, which is definitely an upgrade, but like two guys that essentially will be playing the same role. So I don't know. I mean, like, looking at those Bucks, I feel like they're going to be a little bit better this year. Me and Rob got into this quite a bit in last week's episode, where we kind of kept going back and forth on whether we think the Nets or Bucks are favorites, and that's kind of still where I'm at. I think the Bucks probably they have a lot of places where they are likely to improve. Like, maybe they have a little bit of like that championship glow combined with a nobody believes in us vibe too, which is always a fun contradictory mix. So yeah, I don't know. I have them as favorites right now, and I also think that it's smart for the Nets to make this move of saying like, hey, Kyrie, you're either with the team or you're not. And that's also, I think it's worth noting that like Kyrie has become the center of this. There are other players in the league who are unvaccinated, and their teams aren't necessarily taking such a gung-ho approach about this. Now, I imagine with Kyrie in the Nets situation, you would probably want a little bit more stability. And the thing that they didn't have last year is that, despite the fact that, like, look, this team was really fun to watch last year. The pieces all kind of fit together. They all knew how to shoot, and they just had really great playmakers, but they didn't really know each other that well. So if they're going to be without Kyrie this year and just making that decision, it gives them a really good opportunity to gel. Whereas last year, it was just, they went kind of as far as they could, considering all the chaos that was surrounding that team in terms of like missing games due to COVID, Kyrie being out, Harden being out, bunch of guys being out, KD being out, KD, having to leave a game in the middle of it, like that. To be able to avoid that is amazing for the Nets.
You mentioned KD, and that kind of leads us to our next question, which is what is the early, way too early MVP race look like? And Luka's the favorite, but I kind of think that Kyrie Irving's absence basically makes this Durant's to lose.
It kind of shouldn't it? So the odds are like really, really open this year. Luka is the favorite, but even being the favorite, that puts him at like a 13% probability to win. And then from there, you get like, I can name all of these players, and like, I don't think you would be surprised at any of them winning MVP. You got Embiid, Durant, Giannis, Steph, Dame. Dame is probably one where I'm like, I don't know. Jokic won it last year. James Harden and LeBron James, Trae Young, Devin Booker, Anthony Davis. And then when you get to Kawhi Leonard and Russell Westbrook, that's really when you start being like, okay, these are the guys who won't win it. But like everybody in the top 10 has a really reasonable shot at it. But I do think that, yeah, you're right. To your point, like if KD is healthy and they don't have Kyrie, that definitely ups his chances. But I think you can kind of say that across the board for in a lot of these situations. I think Embiid, if Simmons doesn't play and he has to kind of carry them, and then he also has that shine of being the guy who didn't do that. Those types of things tend to matter in the narrative. Giannis, if the Bucks are just scorching and Giannis is as good as he was last year, like he probably should have won the MVP last year. He just didn't because of voter fatigue. Then Steph's always in there if the Warriors are good.
Yeah,
we'll talk
the Warriors
about them later.
are like the 3 seed or something like that. Like, do you wind up reverting to Steph? I
You
like
might.
the KD Ballon d'Or narrative. So the Ballon d'Or is the yearly award they give to world football soccer players, where they basically award it for the body of work that you have in the year. So if you play for your international team and your club team, and both of those teams do really well, you have a better chance of winning the Ballon d'Or. KD should get this award for the playoffs performance, the Olympics performance, and what we think he's going to do in the season. Like, he should be the clubhouse favorite already, with all respect due to Luka.
Yeah, the Luka thing is actually kind of surprising, right? For him to be the favorite. What do you think about that? Because
I just think that people are like dying for like a new thing. So I just think that Luka's really, really, really great. I'm not saying he's not. But like Dallas still has like a ways to go to be considered a title contender.
Exactly. Like out of all of the players that we've mentioned, like Dallas and Portland are the most likely to kind of be like, oh, this is a 6 seed. And everybody else is going to be on teams that really have a chance of winning. Right now, I'm gonna give it to Giannis. I feel like there's going to be a lot of love for Giannis this season.
I like that. I mean, I think that there's definitely like a feeling as if like he is kind of, if it's possible, taking a leap into like another echelon of NBA all-time superstar.
Yeah, exactly. Like that like we said earlier, that little glow that you get from winning. And I think people will probably notice it more. Like Giannis has strangely gone under the radar for like I think everybody who loves basketball, especially everybody who loves fantasy basketball, knows that Giannis is one of the best players in the NBA, but he has kind of struggled to, I don't know, like get through like the extra membrane that you need for the average sports fan or the casual fan to realize.
I think it's because of the power element of his game. Like, I think we have a tendency to kind of just like guys who are so athletic and so powerful and don't have either the playmaking or the shooting tend to kind of like get the sort of the surface level appreciation, but maybe not necessarily like the in-depth, like, oh, look at how he's controlling the chessboard. Look at how he set this up. Whereas like watching him in those playoffs and especially the final 2 round, like the latter part of the Nets series and the Sun series, it was just like, this guy is basically a god walking on earth. Let's talk a little bit about the preseason, because I was curious about this. I do not really mess with NBA preseason. I don't really find it to be that edifying. I think that a lot of guys are really just kind of like getting their legs underneath of them. But did you learn anything from the NBA preseason this year?
Yeah. So I'll throw both of these takes at you right now. Not purely, but somewhat based on the preseason. I think with the preseason, context is vital. And there are certain teams where it absolutely just doesn't matter. I think the Lakers are a good example of that. But I think with certain teams, such as, let's say, like we're going to talk about the Chicago Bulls, we have not seen this group of players play together before. They are just scoring all of the points in the world. They have multiple playmakers. They're running the floor. They're pretty much the best version of what you could have imagined from this team, like the day that they started playing together. And they're not that bad defensively. I mean, they haven't really played a lot of good offensive teams, but when you have Lonzo's size, you can probably get away with starting Alex Caruso. Maybe that's something to, that has been what they're doing. And that has essentially kind of like held other teams off. And if you like, they'll get Patrick Williams back in order to guard like the bigger wings and stuff. I'm really curious to see what the finishing lineup looks for this team down the line because of the offense-defense issue.
Sure.
Like Nikola Vucevic is kind of like the ultimate regular season player. Like he gives you a ceiling in the playoffs. So really interested to see what they look like later down the line. But honestly, like right now, I'm looking at this team and I'm like, is this a top 4 seed?
So you would put them ahead of, say, the Sixers?
As of right now, yeah. Yeah. How do you feel about that, Chris?
They got to show me first. The Sixers were the number 1 seed last season. So, I mean, Ben Simmons is Ben Simmons, and that's a big question mark. But the Bulls are like, we're talking like the better part of a decade of irrelevance. And I'm glad they got DeMar DeRozan and Lonzo Ball, but those guys aren't exactly like the total culture changers. I mean, I thought that some of the highlights I've seen of the Bulls playing look pretty good. But like when real defense starts to come in, and it's not even like regular season defense is like a monument to the bad boys, but they'll still like have to like face some better defenses and be required to play some of their own. So I'm a little cooler on them, but I definitely think they're a playoff team. Were there any other preseason observations that you felt like, you know, in the Bulls are a top 4 seed zone?
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? Like the Bulls' top 4 seed is a little bit bolder than this, I think. Jordan Poole is going to be an all-star this year.
You think that this is a safer take than the Bulls are a top 4 seed?
Look, I'm just trying to have some fun. Okay. Jordan Poole last season had a great play-in, and those are really playoff games. And he was like a big part of what they were doing. He was scoring a ton of points. He was doing things he hadn't necessarily done before. He was just working guys off the dribble, and he's kind of come back doing the exact same thing, but he has like even more swag. He dropped 30 points in the first preseason game, and he's doing it in ways that look sustainable. Actually, Coach Nick B-Ball Breakdown had a really good video about how he's like kind of just like done different things that Steph and Klay do within the Warriors offense and essentially copied them. So he's a perfect fit as well. I mean, if he's not an all-star, he's still going to be like a major X factor for them. All-star might be a bit much just because like, not because he won't be really good, but just because, you know,
we can only have so many all-stars.
Exactly. You know, it's just like the reputational thing too. Like these things, it takes some time to catch up. But so far, everything I've seen from Jordan Poole just like suggests to me that he's going to have a breakout season.
Yeah, no, I have a hard time seeing Jordan Poole getting into the All-Star game, but I do think you're onto something that like, if the Warriors are able to be like a stable winning franchise this season, he's going to be a big beneficiary of that. It really kind of depends on the kids. That kind of leads me to my next question that I had for you, which is, can the Warriors stay afloat long enough for Klay to come back? And it sounds like you think yes.
Yeah, Jordan Poole is going to be an all-star.
So should I change it to, do the Warriors even need Klay to come back?
I mean, are they going to have enough shots for him? Look,
that's right.
Like when they signed Kevin Durant, like Klay pretty much shot the exact same amount of shots that he shot before. And I just don't know that you can do that with somebody that has like the gravity of Jordan Poole. Like he's just going to need more touches in that. And honestly, if, like for the Warriors to win a championship, like they're going to have to really lean on that. So I don't know, like maybe Klay just like gets replaced by Jordan Poole. No, but for real though, like, yeah, I mean, this team almost made the playoffs last year with like basically just Steph and Draymond and a bunch of guys. Some of those guys are better. Like JTA is going to be better. They just look a little bit better this year. Wiggins fits better. Their defense was pretty elite towards the end of last year, and I imagine
Porter's a good pickup if he's healthy for sure. It really
like
how much
reasonable. He looks, you know, healthy.
How much do you think rests on the kids?
It depends on injuries. Draymond is obviously getting up there, and like I think both those guys are liable to miss some time. But I do think that they have now started to develop enough contingencies that they can make up for that for a couple of games. This is where like the Jordan Poole thing gets a little bit serious too, where like, you know, if he can actually just be a microwave scorer for them, which I think is like a reasonable thing to expect from him, even under the worst case scenario. Like that's important if Steph has to miss a few games, depending on who you play. Same like with Draymond, I feel like they have just like tried to recreate Draymond so many times. You know, to varying levels of success with some of the guys that they've drafted that like they at this point they can handle a couple of games without him. There are a number of stars that have been injured, and also sets up a number of possible returns. Out of those possible returns, obviously Kawhi Leonard is hurt as well with a the torn ACL. Jamal Murray also tore his ACL last year. A little bit earlier than Kawhi. He tore it in April, and he's also much younger and hasn't had the same injury history. So I'm kind of wondering, will we actually see him return this season? And if that's a legitimate possibility, it feels to me like the thing that would be hanging over the West.
Yeah, there's a couple of really big what will this guy be when he gets back questions and if he comes back questions. So we just talked about Klay, Jamal, and then there's the outside, I guess, chance that Kawhi could be back for the playoffs. Murray's really interesting to me because I think anecdotally I've always felt he's like kind of streaky, like that he needs to play himself into the zone, and when he's in the zone, he's just out of his mind. But like he can have like off nights, he can have off weeks. I don't know what that looks like when you're talking about him coming back from such a long layoff. Like, is it likely that even if he were to come back for, say, like a 4th or 5th seeded Nuggets team, would he be able to integrate into a team that probably relied a lot on Michael Porter Jr. Over the course of the season for perimeter and just like scoring from all levels? And would he come back and just be the Jamal Murray that we saw at the end of last season before he got injured? Also, like, I just don't know if the Nuggets, after, I would not say that they ran him into the ground. I think Mike Malone was pretty open about like the idea that they just had too many games in too short of amount of time, and that he wasn't crazy about the way that had an effect on guys like Murray. Like, if you're the Nuggets and you've got this core locked up now, like for the foreseeable future, are you risking long-term stability for short-term gains?
So considering how they've dealt with the Michael Porter Jr. injuries throughout his career, I can't imagine them rushing Jamal back.
Mm-hmm.
Rob Mahoney wrote a great feature about Porter Jr. at the Ringer, and I mean, it got me really excited for the Nuggets season. First of all, it was kind of a reminder of like, wait, these guys were actually like extremely well positioned to win it all. Like the Aaron Gordon trade gave them exactly what they needed.
Yeah.
There's some great stuff in the article about how like MPJ and Aaron Gordon are kind of perfect opposites in that they guard different people, they do different things on the court. And then with the Jamal thing, it's a really good point about him being streaky, and that's not something I thought about, but it just reminded me, like that Jackie Mack feature from a couple of years ago, where Jamal, I think, missed like the first 17 shots of his rookie season, something like that. And he's kind of always been that player. Like, you're right. Like, he always does have to work himself into the season. So I guess obviously this completely depends on his recovery rate. He is 24 years old. In February, he turns 25, which most players like. The ACL is interesting now too, right? Where I think the recovery time is like around 8 to 12 months. But we've also seen players take a longer time to return. So I don't know. Like, I guess the question just becomes like, for the Nuggets, like Jamal has to be in a reasonably good place for them to even start thinking about this. But ceilings don't last that long.
Yeah.
I imagine whatever version of Michael Porter Jr. that we get by February will be pretty damn good, having had like the time to work through like being a ball handler for the offense, and then getting to go back to that role of like not having to have that much attention on him. I mean, I don't know, man. Like a core 4 of Jamal, MPJ, Aaron Gordon, and Jokic, like that's a championship team. It's very enticing to want to you want to be able to return for that. I don't know. I'm really curious to see what happens there. Obviously, like you hope that he, has a great recovery and can come back. But we'll see.
Yeah. The other thing is to keep in mind is when Jamal Murray would be arriving back on the team, for the playoffs, presumably. It's crazy because right now we kind of have rest and minute monitoring as this huge part of the regular season. And then when the playoffs start, it's like, yeah, you're playing 40 minutes a game now. So that could be the time that Murray's coming back, is right when it would be like, we have a 6-man rotation right now.
Yeah. And I imagine if that's the case, they probably wouldn't let him come back. In Rob's article, like they talked about how like MPJ did want to play that year that he sat out, and a bunch of other stuff. So I imagine that, like either way, like if he's not ready, then you gotta pull back and remember, wait, this team is really young.
And I guess that gets into my next question for you, which is, is playoff positioning, is the number one seed specifically, but is playoff positioning worth fighting for right now?
Denver is actually an interesting position for that. Like, if they are fully healthy and they actually end up being the 6th seed, and they play the 3 seed in the first round, which I don't know, like let's say it ends up being the Suns, who we're going to talk about next. Like, I don't think the Suns are exactly thrilled then in that situation, or nor would the Jazz or the Lakers. The Lakers, an older team, we could see them not necessarily pushing for the number 1 seed. But I think like the one thing that shines through in the last few seasons is just the fact that like there's so much unknown in the regular season that most teams don't end up seeding in correlation with like their skill and how much playoff potential they have, whether it's injuries, whether they decide that they want to rest, whether it's just like mid-season trades, things like that. Like teams really get tinkered with throughout the season in a way that they never really used to because of the amount of transactions that happen. So I do think it makes home court matter a little bit less.
It's interesting though. So here's my wrinkle to this is last season was especially experimental. When we got to the conference finals, the Bucks were a 2 seed playing against the Hawks, who were the 4 seed, right? And then the Suns were the 2 playing against the Clippers, who were the 4, like the 3 versus the 6. I can't remember exactly, but it was no 1 seeds made it to the conference finals. That being said, I do wonder whether or not the lack of fans in the crowd last season made it more palatable to coast through the regular season, because you didn't have any kind of palpable sense of like agitation in the crowd to if you had like a 3-game losing streak, if you had a night where it just didn't really work out, and the Sixers never got any scattered boos, until the playoffs. And so I kind of wonder whether or not, I mean, I remember when the playoffs happened, and especially as we got later into the later rounds and the stands were starting to be more and more full, the arenas were more and more full. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. The crowds put a ton of pressure on these guys. Like the crowds put a ton of pressure on coaches. Crowds put a ton of pressure on free throws. Like all that stuff really does come up, especially in the playoffs. So I was kind of thinking, like, let's say the Suns, who I think a lot of people have expectations for, let's say the Suns go like lose 5 out of 10, lose 6 out of 10, like have a kind of just like meh opening part of the season. Like, I don't think the Suns fans are going to be booing them, but I don't think it's going to be the same as we did this in front of like 1,000 people wearing masks, like in the upper deck. Like, this is going to get a little weird at times.
Yeah, I think that's where teams really need to be like very clear about their expectations for themselves within their own locker rooms. Now, the Suns, in particular, a team that I think is like they had a lot of discipline last year about not necessarily putting too much into wins, which did help them. Because they had like a COVID stretch. They also just had a stretch where they just really weren't gelling. And they had to regroup after those losses. I guess I could see it being something that didn't matter as much last year, but like being able to withstand that is something that I think pretty much every championship team has to be able to do. And then like when you consider like the increasing lack of importance of the regular season, I feel like that's something that teams have really started to internalize too, and have like to your point, consider the regular season a lot more experimental.
Let's do one last question here before we get out of here. I think we should end with my adopted hometown here in Los Angeles. What is your vibe check right now on the Russell Westbrook fit in Los Angeles?
The big 3, AD, Westbrook, and LeBron, finally got a chance to play together. They had some moments, dude. Like, they were downright just terrifying. Like, I think the idea of Westbrook, Davis, and LeBron running a fast break sounds really good, but then like you see it in person, and it's like it's legitimately terrifying. Like when one of those guys has a ball and everybody else is running, you don't really know where to put your attention. And like I think it looked especially jarring against a younger team like the Warriors too, where like they could get outmuscled easily by any of those guys. And we saw that a lot in the first half of that game. They're going to have a lot of regular season games like that, right? Like they're just going to be bigger, stronger, faster, better. I think the question for me just becomes like, what do they look like in some of these lineups that don't have like the best spacing? And you also saw like, man, Melo was getting cooked. He was getting cooked by like every possible Warriors young dude. Like out of, I feel like they have like a bunch of second round picks that they've then like developed in Santa Cruz, and like every single one of those guys, like when they saw Carmelo Anthony on them, they were like, oh,
they went to dinner. Yeah.
You're coming home with me, like that's ultimately going to be the issue, right? Like, can they get enough defensive stops that they can just go out and run the break over and over again on you? Because like, if they can, that's excellent, and like that's essentially what they're looking to do. But I could see them getting into some negative feedback loops too, where like if they're not defending well, then like they're going to be clunkier on the other end. And I don't know. We'll see. But one thing I'll say though, man, like I've talked a lot about how the Lakers like didn't have verticality the year before, and like a lot of what I was talking about was like they didn't have Dwight Howard and they didn't have JaVale McGee. Like they didn't have like the guys that can just jump up and get it. Watching last night's game, I realized that what they really didn't have was Rondo. And it's kind of amazing how much of a key he was to them, in when they won the championship in the bubble. And also just how big of a key he's going to be here, just in terms of like being able to throw a lob up literally anywhere. That's just a skill that like I don't know if anybody else in like NBA history has thrown lobs as accurately as Rondo
it's him
has.
and Chris Paul basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even with Chris Paul, there's like a formulaic nature to it where eventually you'll be able to suss it out. I think Rondo might be even a little bit better at that particular aspect of passing. So I don't know, like relying that much on Rondo is like on one end, I think it's really smart that they brought him back. On the other end, I'm like, he's, like probably in his last few years in his career. And as we've known with Rondo for a long time, like it can be feast or famine.
Yeah, I think that the Lakers are going to be incredibly good this year. But I do think that if you play out the scenario 10 times, the 2 or 3 that go really wrong. And I think Rondo is like representative of that. But, a lot of my questions come down to crunch time lineups, crunch time performance, and Davis's position. Like, how much 5 can he give you? How much 5 do you need from him? And I guess really a big question with the Lakers, because it's been the major reason why they didn't win the title the other 2 years. Well, I mean, at least last season is the injuries, and whether or not, LeBron is going to have another significant injury as he gets older, whether or not Davis can stay healthy. It's hard to guess that kind of stuff, but they are so locked up with this particular roster and with this age cohort that there's just not a lot of like youth and exuberance outside of like Malik Monk coming out of that team. THT is hurt, but he'll probably be back at some point. They have some bounceability. They have some like, oh, this is a fun young guy, but they're relying a lot on some dudes who are closer to my age than they are to Luka Doncic's age.
Yeah, the strange thing is that their bouncy guys are their older guys like LeBron and Westbrook. And Davis is in his prime. Zach Cram wrote about how the Lakers, could potentially be the oldest team in NBA history. I feel like you could do 10, like, what are the 10 biggest questions ahead of the season just for the Lakers? Like, to the point of combustibility.
There's so many little wrinkles with them. It's like their assistant coach turnover, I think, is notable. I think it's worth, I keep that in mind. Like, in terms of, like, locker room harmony, that kind of stuff really matters. I think that, I think the Westbrook thing is going to be, like, he's a very prideful person, and I don't know that he'll ever allow, like, himself to be like not on the floor in the last 2 minutes of the game. But like, what happens if he blows a couple of games? What happens if he bricks a 3 when LeBron is relatively open, or Wayne Ellington is relatively open on the perimeter? Like, that kind of stuff is going to happen. And then like the difference between being on the Lakers and being on, say, even like the Bucks, who won the title, is like just a lot more questions get asked in a lot more of a pointed way when things are going wrong. So we'll have to see. Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this season. Seerat, thanks so much for joining me as always. This has been a special Ringer Preview Palooza version of The Answer.